Now, the WMAL Fisher House Radiothon continues. Please support our wounded warriors and their families by calling in your contribution now. 888-294-8560. That's 888-294-8560.
It's the WMAL Fisher House Radiothon, the 2024 edition. Please give us a call at 888-294-8560. The Fisher House Foundation is such an incredible organization, and they do such great work for our active duty military, for our veterans, and most importantly, honestly, for their parents, for their families, for their spouses, for their children. When those wounded warriors need medical attention, no matter what it is, the families are taken care of. The families have a home right there while they're waiting for their hero, their mom and dad, their child, their hero to be on the mend, and they have a wonderful, safe, and loving room, a roof over their head, thanks to Fisher House. Please give us a call now, and every dollar you donate is doubled right now by the great people at Leonardo DRS. So please give us a call, 888-294-8560. Larry O'Connor here with Emily Domenech. Thank you, Emily, for being here. It's always good to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
And joining us right now is South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson, who was there for the arguments of the Supreme Court yesterday. Mr. Attorney General, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Larry and Emily, it's great to be with you this morning. Thanks for having me.
I want to play a moment here. This is an exchange with the lawyer and activist for ACLU, Chase Strangio, and Justice Samuel Alito. Take a listen to this, and then we'll get your comment.
Fluid.
I think that the distinguishing characteristic is to have a birth sex that does not align with, or a gender that does not align with one's birth sex. So it may include people who have different understandings of their gender identity, but I think it is still the distinguishing characteristic of a birth sex and a gender identity that are incongruent.
Are there individuals who are born male, assigned male at birth, who at one point identify as female, but then later come to identify as male, and likewise for individuals who are assigned female at birth, at some point identify as female, identify as male, but later come to identify as female? Are there not such people?
There are such people. I agree with that, Justice.
So it's not an immutable characteristic, is it?
Well, I think people's understanding of it shifts, but the evidence shows that there is at least a strong underlying basis. And I think the normative reason for that particular consideration is whether or not this is something that someone should or could change. And
yeah, that stumble there tells everything, I think, Mr. Attorney General. That was kind of a critical moment. That's the ACLU attorney basically conceding that whatever these characteristics are with those children who are identified as transgender, it's not immutable. Why is that important to this constitutional argument, sir?
Well, first off, they're trying to argue, at least there was an argument that individual was making, where transgender individuals should be a quasi-suspect class. So when you are a suspect class, like when a class based on gender or based on ethnicity or based on some defining quality, if there's a discriminatory effect against that class, then the level of scrutiny that the government must get over in order to have that law go into effect goes up. In other words, it gets harder for the government to pass a law. Mm-hmm. They were trying to make an argument that transgender should be a suspect class, like a permanent class of people. And what Justice Alito was seeking to, pull or extract from that individual was, well, if these people can shift back and forth, if people can identify as trans and then detransition and go back to their biological sex, then how can that be an immutable quality, meaning it doesn't change?
Right.
If it changes, if it can change back and forth, then how can you argue that it should be a suspect class? They were wanting there to be male, or they were wanting there to be some, they wanted to be able to protect males, protect females, and then protect a third class, transgender. And I think what Alito
which can be defined by an immutable characteristic, and therefore,
that's right.
I mean, it sounds to me like that exchange right there sort of destroys their entire case.
And that's why Justice Alito was going through that back and forth exchange with the ACLU attorney. So that really kind of destroyed them. And of course, that was probably the second most ridiculous argument I heard. The most ridiculous argument I thought was Justice Jackson trying to analogize the issues in this case with that of Loving v. Virginia, which, as you know,
interracial
Virginia
marriage.
passed a law, interracial marriage. And of course, that was really just demonstrates how far afield they will go to try to prohibit states from passing reasonable laws that prevent the gender mutilation and the chemical castration of young minor children. They're trying to make an argument that states that it is wrong or that it is harmful to 12-year-olds to tell them that they can't have irreversible surgeries until they reach the age of 18, which, as you just played the clip, that person admitted that people do try to detransition years later.
Sir, I want to pull the thread there a little bit. Isn't this really just about redefining the age of consent? And couldn't perhaps a ruling against your position open up challenges to other laws that protect minors in the same way?
Well, it could. I mean, it is a slippery slope. I mean, you go into that slippery slope fallacy when you do this. But here's the thing: states pass reasonable laws that restrict children's ability to sit in the front seat of a car based on their age or weight. States pass laws restricting the access of children to buy tobacco products or get alcohol. States even pass laws restricting the age of children's right to consent to having sex. And so it is a slippery slope. But, if states can pass a law restricting access to minors till they reach the age of majority on those things, which, having a cigarette or drinking a beer are not necessarily irreversible things, but mutilating your genitalia or chemically castrating yourself are irreversible.
Right.
And so they're making an argument that the states can't do that. And so, yes, it is a slippery slope on consent.
Therefore, Justice Sotomayor's comparison to aspirin side effects also wouldn't be a real valid jurisprudence argument there. It must have been hard for you not to roll your eyes a few times during these arguments, sir.
I did a lot of eye rolling, but I will tell you this: there was a person sitting next to me who I could tell where they were on this issue because they were nodding in vigorous agreement with everything that the three liberal justices said and everything that the folks challenging the law were saying. So, I mean, there were people in there very much for this.
Can you give us you're on one side of this issue and your state, South Carolina, you're the Attorney General there. You have a vested interest in this, but do you feel like you can take the temperature of the court and some of the things that Chief Justice Roberts was saying that could give us an idea of where this is going to head?
I mean, listen, the conservative members of the court, the ones that spoke, and I don't recall Justice Gorsuch asking a single question of either side. He was incredibly quiet during the entire 2.5 hours I was in the room. I don't recall him saying anything. But from the other 5 members of the quote unquote conservative wing of the court, they seem to show some skepticism, and they ask probing questions that seem to indicate that if they were to rule this way, for instance, one question that several justices asked had to deal with, well, how would this case affect men and women's sports issues?
Right.
There's this concern that if we create a quasi-suspect class, or we rule under, equal protection jurisprudence on this, say we're treating boys and girls differently based on those who want therapy. Is this going to open up the doors to transgender men playing in women's sports? And so that told me that they were concerned that whatever they're going to rule, and I'm guardedly optimistic that they're going to rule in favor of Tennessee and the other 24 states who have laws like Tennessee, including mine. But if they were to rule, that would be very narrow construction. So I'm very guardedly optimistic that we'll get a favorable ruling. I don't want to say that. I don't want to tempt fate, but yes. I'm very guardedly optimistic.
Well, thank you for that, and I appreciate you joining us this morning, sir, and have a safe trip back to South Carolina, if you're not there already.
Yes, sir, I am. Thank you so much.
I figured that's, if I were in South Carolina, I'd get out of D.C. as soon as possible, too.
Absolutely.